All right, good afternoon. Yeah, good morning was a little better. Maybe you all need to go up, get a coffee, like both my guests have, but we won't allow that, right? So because we need to get over this, right? So Herve, John, thank you so much for taking the time out. I wanted to just start with this whole RPA sort of narrative that has taken over this corporate world right now. Tell us a little bit about your own history, right? When did you get introduced to RPA, how, and why did you sort of think or did not think that it made sense for your organization? Maybe we'll start with you, Herve.
Sure. So Herve Coureil, I work for Schneider Electric, pretty big company in the field of energy management and industrial automation. For us, we really started the RPA journey a couple of years ago. In the context, not unusually, of a large digital transformation. We had to go through a pretty big journey, 4 big themes. One theme around the development of new digital services to our customers, around efficiency and sustainability. We had a second theme that was the digital experience of our customer. Third theme around security. The fourth theme was around automation, right? And basically, how do we improve our operations? And we found out that we could only chew that many heavy, end-to-end business process reengineering at the same time because they're highly disruptive, etc. And it did make sense to have sort of another avenue towards automation and efficiency that was a lighter touch avenue. And that's where we started looking at really RPA as a way to think about automation more as a task level rather than a full end-to-end process level, and having, again, a way to get to ROI faster than through a full end-to-end process reengineering. So that's kind of the story. And today, number of bots is not a great measure, but we have 170 of those, and that's growing. We've established a COE, so the normal path. But that's kind of a context for us.
Got it. John, what's your story?
Yeah, so John Cottongim, Automation Director at Mars. I've been at Mars for about 15 months now. And really started up their automation journey with an exception of some groundswell in finance before it really got started. So we've had a really fun and fast first year or so of the COE, 55 or so automations in place. I lost track of how many bots, but it's probably pushing 100 bots or so that actually come to work, log in every morning, and look at queues and do work for us. My background before Mars was, I was doing the same thing, but I did it at AIG for about 5 years, running an automation COE for the Life Retirement and Shared Service Center for them. But I came to this through the operational excellence, lean process change world. So I actually am not a technologist. This is the first time I'm sitting within the digital technology or IT space. So I come at this a little bit with the process redesign and hopefully a sense of user centricity as well, which that comes with. And Mars's overall digital journey really has 3 pillars, one of which is, thankfully, user centricity. Then we have our automation, and then the other is the analytics and AI component. So that's the 3 legs of the stool of digital transformation at Mars.
Yeah. We call it the AAA trifecta, the automation, analytics, and AI, and I think
plus user centricity.
Which needs
you need some heart in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
We all have different flavors of AAA. Yes. We have align, accelerate, and automate. So another trifecta.
So you both have had quite some experience with these automation tools. Can you give us one example where it really worked well and one example where it completely bombed?
So, I can start with what worked well. It's always easier. I think one of the interesting use cases that we found is when you are blending, on one hand, some cognition capability, like natural language processing, plus hard rules, on applying hard rules. So if you combine both, an interesting use case for us was, in certain countries we have customers that would order a product by email. So you imagine you can have a typical box, you go through the email, parse it, and then you go through the hard rules of checking your credit limit, etc., and then processing the order. So those are things that, those are tasks, right, at the task level that we used to do through Operator that now can do things that are more added value, and we have the bots playing with that. And I really felt that the sweet spot was really that combination of conversational abilities plus, applying hard rules on the other end. On the other side, what didn't work that well were more on the finance side, where, we had probably slightly more undefined processes, data that were not necessarily having the same quality, and a lot of orchestration layer added on top of it. And those were the experience that didn't work that well. So we try really now to look at simple task, quick ROI, and be driven by the use case more than anything else, and the clarity of the use case. It's how you're going to go on top of the queue inside the center of excellence in order to get your bot being executed.
Got it.
So I'll start with the downsides or the use cases that don't work out. Typically, that's the treadmill of change for these automations. You don't want to be on a treadmill of change, right? You want a stable ground to work in. And traditionally, where does that come as a challenge? In reporting processes. So I understand that we are still, from a management information standpoint, people like their old school spreadsheets and PowerPoints, but I think we really need to get away from that. And if somebody asks us to automate PowerPoint or reports in general, right? I don't care if you have 3 people doing it. You really need to do more change management and try to get that to a more modern process as best you can. What works really well, and this is where the focus is for me and certainly for the COE, it's getting to where the value of the firm is. And so a lot of these efforts start within the shared service organizations or within what we would call back office, which by its nature, right, is not where the firm derives its value. The closer we get to that, so for instance, we have a process that we call the fact sheet automation. So for us to stock a new Snickers product on the shelves of Walmart or Tesco, we need to tell those companies, here's what the product looks like, here's what the UPC code, here's what it's going to be priced, here's the shelf space and what the box looks like. Now, if you work at a large company, you realize each of those pieces of information I just mentioned come from individual systems that have different individual SMEs and stakeholders. And if you think about putting the human workflow together, that means you probably have a 3-week process to get everybody to work their queues and get things together. Now, these are all fairly deterministic processes, though, and this is one as well. So you could take that process down from 3 weeks down to a day. And what have you done? You haven't really changed the way that the work was done, but you've removed all the queues in between, and you've really delighted those customers, the business partners of yours, because it now feels like a modern business process, and it goes at the heart of the value of the company. And I think more and more we have to get emboldened to stop doing processes just in the back office and get to where the value of the firm is.
Yeah. So that's very helpful to understand, because I think, to be honest, there's a lot of RPA bullshit that's also going around, wherein RPA has become this silver bullet that will solve for world hunger, which is not true. So
that's AI, I think.
That's now AI, and then talk about blockchain and so on.
That was last year.
Yeah, but I wanted to give the audience a flavor of, look, it's not going to work everywhere, but there's good things and bad things. But let's also talk about the maturity of an organization. And we at HFS sort of define enterprise maturity across 4 levels. So level 1 is sort of an experimenter, right, which is basically in one nook or corner, somebody's trying some tool and, hey, it works, right? So maybe level 2 is more of a tinkerer, where you take that experiment and say, hey, without having any formal organization around it, but let's see and expand it to other use cases, right? The third level comes to be more of the explorer, right? Wherein you start to put some method to the madness and try and sort of chart new territories. And then the fourth level is more the disruptor, right? Where you're radically transforming something. Where would you classify your organizations to be on those four levels?
I would say by certain aspects, I would see her being on the second level
Incorrect.
because we like to be use case centric, and we have some element of your third because there's some method in the madness, there's the COE, etc. And I think that's an important juncture because what would always worry me with RPA, but many of the buzzwords you were mentioning is that, oh yes, I have a great technology, show me a process, show me a problem that I can solve, right? And we try to start with a problem, the use case, rather than the technology, and in that order, if possible. So we try to be pretty strict with this idea that everything starts with a use case. Everything starts with solving a problem, becoming more efficient, on something that has been described in business terms, and to your point, is actually deterministic enough so that applying RPA makes sense. So that's a use case that's ripe for RPA. But I think that's the most important thing. We try to keep our some discipline on, instead of saying, okay, now we have some fabulous RPA engineers. Let's try to paint everything RPA.
So you're 2.5.
2.5, yeah. Okay. We like some creativity.
John?
Yeah, I think, so I've been on the journey a while, so I'll just thinking back, naturally everybody starts in the tinkerer phase, yeah? And even if you're a large company today, you're going to start with POCs and tinkering, yeah? And you get to exploring and setting up your COEs. I think that's probably where a company I left was probably in that state. Mars is definitely in a transformation mode. I'm not going to say every team within the organization is there, but from a top-level mindset, an enablement standpoint, and how we structure the teams, how we kind of pair them together, it's as transformative as you can essentially provide the offering to be. And then it's really up to the business stakeholders to take some managerial courage, look at the proof points around the firm that leverage these technologies. And then shake your hand and put some faith that you're going to be a good partner together and make this work. And with 50 or hundreds of proof points around the firm, I think that it's probably the point for folks to dive in head first and see what happens.
Yeah. So you're probably 3.1.
Yeah, maybe 3.5.
3.5,
yeah.
all right,
yeah.
okay.
Gotta be optimistic.
So I'm trying to get here somewhere, and I'll ask the audience a question, right? So in your enterprises, just raise your hands, how many of you are doing something with RPA? All right, pretty much quite a few. And how many of you would say you've completely scaled this thing up, right? And that's the problem with RPA, right? And you mentioned, and you too have been on this journey, and you wouldn't still sort of say that you've completely scaled this thing up, right? Whether it's 2, 2.5, 3, whatever number, and however we classify it. But the challenge, or one of the biggest challenges with automation has been, how do you scale it up to at an enterprise level? And as you can see from this group, right, I can talk about our research. We've interviewed more than 500 of the global 2,000 enterprises, and nobody really is at level 4, even in their self-assessment, right? So why is this thing so hard to scale? What's the issue? Why? Because RPA is no longer a new thing. We actually talked about RPA in 2012 when we were talking to a company called Blue Prism at that point of time, and they came to us and said, hey, we have this nice new technology, it automates stuff, and then we wrote a piece called Welcome to Robotistan, and which was picked up in The Economist, etc., and so the term RPA was born. So it's been like 7 odd years. But why is it so hard to scale?
Let me maybe cut to the chase from my point of view. And how to, because how to scale, I'm talking a little bit about how to scale, right?
Yes.
But what's preventing scale, or what limits scale? Let's call it that.
Sure.
What limits scale, I think, is time, and the human capacity to change on these teams. So these teams that you need to work with do not have infinite time, nor do they have infinite capacity to change and run their business at the same point. I think if there's anything that's going to limit progress in this space, or limit or the rapid adoption in this space, it's those two things. Because can the COE that I head up, can we run 1,000 automations a year if we planned, if the demand was there? Absolutely. Yeah, but I think the disruption within the business is so great at that point, because you're not installing a new ERP system. You're making point changes 1,000 different points around the company. So that capacity for change is naturally going to limit, govern the pace that we could go here.
I think, yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the human factor, obviously, right? And the fact that certain of the problem that RPA solves can be solved by non-RPA solutions, right? Which, and of course, you can have some of internal competition about the best way to solve a particular problem, which can be pretty good, by the way. And I think the other thought is, what does scale mean in the context of RPA, right? Is scale about having a high degree of replicability, like you identify your problem, you find your business case, you confirm value, then you're able to ship a bot relatively quickly, or is scale having painted the wool company with RPA in places that might not be the best fit for this technology? So we like to try to think about scalability much more from the perspective of replicability, rather than sort of global use everywhere, right?
From just like a purely academic sense, right? So if you understand that you have constraints, so you understand that you have human constraints, you understand you have capital constraints, logically you're running a business, what does that mean? Right? Well, that means that you want to identify where your opportunities are, you want to pick off the ones that have the most value, and you want to work down the stack from there. So I think the fact that we can't put in 1,000 automations a year realistically is not in and of itself a problem, right? I think ultimately what you need to do then is have that be a call to action to let people know, I could do as much support of your business processes with these technologies as you want. Where is the most valuable time for your people to spend? Because ultimately that's the restricted commodity. So wherever that time is, and ultimately that probably means where does the end consumer derive the most value? So how do we think that user centricity and then work our way down the stack of value? And ultimately that's, I think, how it should be prioritized.
Yeah. Does impatience play into this? I think a lot of organizations in today's world are very impatient, right? When you ask a question of when do you think this thing will be up and running, almost always the answer is in the next 12 months, right? Earlier on, maybe even if I look back in my career, 5 or 7 years ago, it was a 2-year, 3 year sort of a journey. Now, 12 months seems very long. So do you think there's an angle of impatience coming into this as well?
I think there is. And I think, there's also some kind of, many of large companies have gone through those mega projects that, usually take much longer than anticipated, cost more,
right.
End up with all sorts of trouble and so forth. So I think there's also quite an appetite in lighter touch solutions that can, maybe don't have, again, the same sort of absolute, don't bring the same level of efficiency end to end, but still, if you can get there, 80% of the way in 10 times faster, it's still a good deal.
Right.
So I really see a shift also in the appetite of the enterprise for, heavy transformation. That means you're going to replace things that already exist by something else. If it works, don't touch it, improve it. So I don't know if you feel that as well, but I think that's one of the shifts I've observed over recently.
The world is changing so fast now. Who has time for patience, right? So the world is moving underneath you. If you could do it in 8 weeks successfully for a year, then everyone's going to ask for it in 6. And someone's going to figure out how to deliver it in 4 in 2 years, so you better figure out how to get it down to 6 now. But ultimately, I think that the RPA is just the tip of the spear of lightweight, rapid development business solutions. So if I'm not running an RPA team several years from now, but running a lightweight, rapid development business solution team, I won't be surprised, right? Because ultimately, we're trying to add value at pace. So, so who has time for patience?
Yeah,
and I really agree with you, and we see the same path. It's kind of a return of a custom application, right? And lightweight solution, fast, so RPA can be a way, there's others, but how do you very quickly deliver value, solve a point solution, right? Being mindful of an overall architecture, but being much faster in delivering value.
Yeah. So piggybacking on the point that you were making, John, on these solution versus technology sort of a conversation, I think there's also a cart before the horse syndrome that's happening, right? We have a fork and let's see what food can we eat with that fork, kind of a thing. And it's common across these service providers or the technology providers. We are selling RPA, we are selling some form of AI, we are selling this. It's also, I think, fair to say that it's common across enterprises, right? You have a RPA COE, you have this COE, you have that COE. It's common in these conferences, right? You have a RPA track, you have an AI track, you have some other track, right? Shouldn't these things come together at some point of time? That's a solution will be when multiple technologies come together and solves a problem. I rarely can I think of one technology solving everything.
So let me maybe just put a spin on this too. Yeah. Who do you want developing your RPA? A generalist or a firm that just develops RPA? Well, I want somebody who specializes in it. From experience, I know that they deliver better quality. It's a quirky little product, and it takes somebody with specialization. Specialization is how economics actually flourishes, right? We all know that. So I think that there's a special kind of someone that architects and stitches together these technologies. And if there's anybody that's maybe undervalued at your firm, it really is the technology architect type of role. I think they're kind of shoveled to the back and blended with procurement, which is a real problem. But ultimately, you can't be an expert at all. These things are too disparate today. Eventually, I think they'll all become more plug and play, more low code, more community friendly. That maybe there is somebody who will be able to implement all of them. But I think today the piece that you need is an architect to stitch it together, but you want specialists delivering your products.
And we would think along similar lines. I think what matters to us first is the subject matter expertise, right? And then you have technology platforms. And yes, you can have at certain level, you can have language processing, you can have something that are sort of borrowing, right, on the AI platform and if you integrate a machine sort of a signal, you may borrow to the IoT. So yes, there's technology platforms, but at the end of the day, again, you don't want technology that is looking for a problem to solve. You want subject matter expertise because you want to be able to create value for your customers and address very specific solutions. So that would always be the primary angle for us. And then, yes, of course, we try to be efficient. We try to have a modern architecture on top of the most recent technology platform, but that's an enabler that's a mean to an end.
Sure, but just to move that point forward, right? Do you see an ecosystem developing at some point of time? So I agree with the specialization point, right? You don't want jack of all trades, but ultimately you need to bring people together also, right? So are you seeing some sort of ecosystems in your own organization developing where some sort of collaboration or either internally or through external partners sort of starting to happen?
Yeah, and interesting with Mars is that they very intentionally have put a lot of these teams in close physical proximity. very unusual, I think, actually, at large multinational firms.
Yes.
And that fosters just this communication, this understanding of what's happening in data architecture, what's happening in AI, what's happening in integration and APIs, right? So ultimately, I think you need specialists, but you need to create the situations for them to be able to bump into each other, collaborate, and push the theoretical ball forward a little bit.
I would say our technology office, so the architect team, etc., has a much more prominent role than it used to have because there's so many platforms that require integration, etc. And we do see a convergence between, it's hard yet to give it a name, but everything that would relate to custom development, right? Whether it's a custom app, whether it's an RPA bot, etc. So here we really see, because again, all this can be various ways of addressing a similar problem, So this we really see, yes, a convergence that starts to emerge, and we feel that from a skill standpoint, definitely, architects, integration, API are the things that are in very high demand right now, and that we're trying to make much more visible throughout the organization.
Okay. So Ted is showing me the 1 minute slam, but I think we can have at least one audience question.
Yeah, it only took a few hours, but I finally found the same conference room.
Yes, yeah, there you go.
My question was, I'm very interested to know, in your automation solutions, are you just finding one particular flavor, or are there multiple flavors and different solutions that you're using?
We're using a couple to answer.
Yeah,
that depends really on the use case so far. That might change in the future, I'm not yet sure. But so far we're using a couple of different solutions, and for a lot of reasons, right? Legacy or whatever.
My title is automation director, but that's kind of a misnomer, because the entire digital technology team is automating. So it's hard for me to say that I use RPA most often, but is workflow orchestration maybe in ServiceNow, right? Is that not automation? Is the system development in certain circumstances that? So I mean, the short answer is of course yes. I think some really neat things that are sort of on the near-term horizon is how much can we give the tools to the folks that are actually working the process. I think RPA is maybe too flexible today to be implemented with great quality in a federated approach without lots of guidelines around it. But things like Microsoft's Flow product, where it's within a certain guardrails, that's a very interesting space. And I think you'll see a lot more utilization of that in the near term.
Part of a convergence you were mentioning.
Yeah. All right, so before...
You can take one more question.
Okay, so Ted has allowed us one more question, so...
So when you're talking with your business and helping them think about what makes a good candidate for automation, are there any special tactics you use in helping set that mind frame? There's some obvious ones that everybody thinks of in terms of how much effort it's taking, but I think one of the great unthought of challenge or items is how long does the process take just from end to end? So is it a process that takes 4 weeks? And it can be something without those work queues that could chop down to just a day or less, right? The delight that a customer might have, even if you're not really impacting the amount of work that's being done. And the other major thing that I try to drive home is don't show up with your problems, show up with your processes, and particularly those processes that you haven't heard complaints about, that happen at scale, that happen every day, because it's those processes that are stable, that people do without thinking they're a problem, that are actually the things that are most automatable. It's the problems that are the most human processes in the company, and that's where the associates are best.
And I would say we like to summarize things in one golden metrics, and that's really time saved. So we're trying to look at how many minutes saved, per day, so that we can free people energy and doing things that are less repetitive and more adding value for customers.
Okay. So before I let you go, if there was one wish that could come true, what would that be for you?
I think the stuff that would be great is to have the evolution of conversational interface and have actually using those interface so that you can blend rules in processes, update them, extend. So sort of how could you code through conversation and basically set rules very easily via a conversation. I think it's gonna get there at some point, and I think that could be another tremendous way of harnessing more productivity.
So if I'm not wishing for world peace,
that's another one.
Yeah, then I think it's how do you create, we need automations that are excellent partners for the teams that we're helping solve. Because today I think that they are terse helpers at best, and they're not friendly, communicative, joyful partners on the team. And I think that's where we need to get to.
Yeah. So if there are any budding entrepreneurs here are a couple of ideas.
Yeah.
Here are the next $1 billion ideas. But thank you, Herve.
Thank you,
John.
Thank you.
Thank you.